Hey everyone, Jake Smeester here, creative content specialist for Amazon Sumerian, and we are back to we're doing office hours, so if you have any questions about anything, which looks like Wheel Rainstorm 83, asking some good questions, I tried playing around but couldn't get anything to display and couldn't figure out how to find output since I don't really know JavaScript. Interesting. Could you tell me, did you get into Sumerian? Did you see the dashboard, or did you actually were you able to load a scene? If you could answer me that would be great. Again, responding to the chat room right now. Wheel Rainstorm 83. We'll try to help you get going as best you can. Again, I also just posted the documentation site or the tutorial site right there, the docs.sumerian. And so forth. If you check that out, there's a lot of great documentation, live tutorials to get you started with Sumerian. And so that's a great place to get started, especially the first couple tutorials that are at the very top of the list were really helpful in getting you just more comfortable. And you don't have to know JavaScript. It's one of the great things about it is that you can get going without knowing, you don't have to script. It's helpful. There's a lot of things you can do if you do know how to script, but you don't have to. There's the state machine. It's a node-based editor, a behavior editor that allows you to essentially script with just using nodes and connecting with the transitions and adding actions and to create those behaviors. Okay, got some other questions. I could get 3D objects in a scene, but I was trying to make text appear or even just debug prints. Right, did you get into the state machine then? And Kirby's answer, maybe you mean the console.log or the log message action. Yeah, it just depends on what you were doing in the state machine and what kind of behavior. If you were using the state machine, that would be the question. All right, so for today, and keep asking your questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat room. Today we are going to continue with our scene that we've been working on. Let me jump over to I'm actually in the wrong scene. So let me get out of this one and into the city scene, loading it now. Last week we looked at how to add advertisements, videos, and display, how to display like images and have them rotate like a banner of some kind. So for example, I'm just going to press play. And over here, okay, so maybe you wanted to use count and have an action where a certain number was reached. Yeah, that's certainly possible to do that. I did cover that kind of quickly in a past broadcast. There are a few different actions. Let me open the state machine and show you. Okay, so I'm just going to open up a random behavior, and I'm just going to add a new state and just bring it over here. Add action. So counter. So there's a few different ways to do this. So incremental counter is basically going to be the counter itself. And so it's going to be the one that it clicks, or it keeps a count of how many times the behavior has passed through or transitioned through that state. That's going to be the incremental counter. So you can name the counter, and then you can decide the increment and the amount of times it actually counts when it passes through that, with the number that you want to use there. If we add action again, I can look at compare counter. Compare counter will then look at the incremental counter and say, okay, what is going on with that counter? So you want to have like the name there and name here match, because you're naming the incremental counter here. The compare counter, you're also looking at this counter, and then based on the value that you reach here, whether it's less than or equal to or greater than that value, it can transition to a different state. And looking at the chat room again, I have an action when certain number is reached, either counting up by 1 per second, then make an object appear when it reaches 10. Okay, so you're trying to do it either counting up by 1 per second, then make an object appear when it reaches 10. So you could also do a timeline. Let's see. I'm trying to think. So, well, let me just finish what I was saying there. So that's how typically these two counters work. They work in tandem together. And then if we look at set counter, that'll essentially set the counter to be whatever value you want it to be. So you can reset it to 0 if you want it to start over again. You could also jump it up to another count if you wanted that to happen. So that's what the set counter would do. Compare counter would be, I've actually never done compare two counters before, so I can't speak to with a lot of experience on that one. But that would obviously look at and compare two different counters and do something with that based on, here we go. Is counter 1 less than counter 2? Is counter 1 equal to counter 2? Or is it greater than counter 2? And so you can make transitions based off those values. So those are the counters. Now you're asking, does a counter need to stay, let's see, let me try to catch up. Either counting by 1 per second. All right, Wheel Rainstorm 83 is asking, either counting up by 1 per second, then make an object appear when it reaches 10. If you're just trying to make something appear after a certain amount of time, I would just use the wait action. So if you just go wait, you can just make it, it'll pause on this. I'll just rename this. Wait for a second. And I'll just move everything over so I can just focus on the wait transition. So let's say you have a state over here where you click. This is a click action, and then it transitions to wait. And then the wait action would be, it just waits for 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever you want it to be. This is in milliseconds, so 5,000 milliseconds is 1 second. And then it transitions to something else. So if you're just trying to pause it for a certain amount of time or do a timer, essentially, that would probably be the best action to use. Does a counter need to stay all on one object, or can it affect another object? So if you use the emit or listen actions, you can communicate with other entities. So if I'm using a counter or a wait action and it transitions after a certain amount of values or a certain amount of time, you can emit a message, and then that message can be listened to by another entity, and then that entity can then take action into something, if that makes sense. Then last question, I was trying to play with what I thought was a simple scenario, but it turned out to be so complicated. It just depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to tell me exactly what you're trying to do, I mean, you've kind of given me bits and pieces. If you kind of take the full view of, like, I'm trying to make this happen, maybe I can help you out a little bit better there. Also, I am on Slack, so if you do have any questions, and you can send me screenshots and I can try to walk you through as well. But yeah, maybe type out what you're actually trying to accomplish, like what's the big picture. And it sounds like doesn't sound like, it sounds feasible and shouldn't be too complicated. So I'll try to walk you through that. All right, I'm going to delete out of these. And thanks for joining Wheel Rainstorm 83. And okay, so 2 weeks ago, let's start with 2 weeks ago, we looked at how to make it turn from night to day. And if you see right now, I have the scene playing. It's going from light to dark, and then the lights are going down, or the sun is going down. And essentially, it's just a light is just rotating. Oops, the light is just rotating around a scene, and then I'm having a sphere that's basically the same orbit size as the rotation of that light. It is just turning on. It's a black sphere that is becoming full opacity and then invisible. So it's visible, invisible, visible, invisible, and it's going at the same time as the rotation, or it's timed up accurately with the rotation of that directional light that is making it look like it's turning from night to day. So that was 2 weeks ago. Last week we looked at how to add videos. So I added the trailer for Jack Ryan, a Amazon Prime Video original, and just put it on this billboard using an HTML 3D component. And then we used a simple script, and pulling from an S3 bucket, we just added some images that are now rotating based on a certain amount of time. I think they pause for 2 seconds, and then so I just have 3 images in that bucket that are now rotating. So a Sumerian image, a AWS logo image, and also a Twitch image. So that is what we did last week. And we also started looking at how to make a car drive around a scene. Now, I've been kind of messing around with this week, and there's been a few roadblocks, no pun intended. Some things are working, some things are not working as I had expected. And that's partly because of the physics, that there's some known issues. If you've been using Sumerian, there's some known issues with physics that are on our roadmap, and some things we are working on. But it just creates some sometimes unexpected behaviors. All right, Kirby, can you share the script with us at the time to talk about cores? Cores, yes. I don't know a ton about cores, but what I do know is that you need to have that certain configuration set up so that an outside application can actually grab images from your S3 bucket. So if you have the configuration and I can provide that for you. I don't have it on me. I will have to post this afterwards. Or actually, even last week, Kirby, somebody reached out to me and asked me that, and I was able to give it to him. So go ahead, and if you send me a message on Slack, I'm AWS Jake. I will send you that information afterwards. I just don't have it in front of me right now. But yes, I can get you both of those things. All right, in Wheel Rainstorm 83, I thought it would be nice to have a scene where I could have a dashboard that would pull up objects from a console and make them appear in front of you when you press a button or pull a lever, so that you could cycle through a showcase of objects. You would only see one at a time. When you move to the next one, it would despawn and spawn the new one. I tried to break it into smaller steps and thought the first part would be good to start, making objects appear and disappear. Okay, so yeah, so you don't have to know JavaScript to do that. And again, responding to Wheel Rainstorm 83's question, and really what would be best, the best thing to do, I would recommend, is that let's create a new. Let's see. I'm just going to create, I'm just picking a random entity here and adding a state machine, and I'll start a new behavior. I will stop my scene. So what you would want to do is, are you clicking on, let me think. So are you clicking on the same button or the same entity to rotate between these objects that you want to show and then hide? That would be an important question. Is it one button or is it one object you want to click on? So you're just trying to create a single button, for example, that you press, and then it shows an object, and you press it again and it goes to the next object. Yeah, that would, okay, so you're saying one object for, okay, that's actually super easy. What you would do is, okay, let me just, I'm thinking how I want to do this. All right, okay, let's use, so we're using city, there we go, muscle car. This is great. Thank you for your questions. This is one of the reasons why we want to be here, so that we can show you how to do this and answer your questions. So there are some things that I can walk through today if we don't get to them, because everybody, if you have other questions, it's totally fine. All right, let's see. Create entity. I'm just going to create, I'm going to select a cylinder. Now, one of the issues is that my cylinder is going to be way over here. And then, oops, no. Where is my cylinder? Okay, so all I'm doing is just getting the cylinder somewhere in my scene. The center of my scene is not in the middle of the city. It's really offset, which is kind of annoying. But it's just kind of the way I did it getting started, which was my mistake. All right, so let's see. This cylinder is going to act as my button. Let's just go 90 degrees. Okay. So how do we do this? And I see another question. Let me show to do this, and then I'll get to the next question. Let's make it so I click on this cylinder, and it makes this car disappear. So let's start by, this is the muscle car. Okay, so I'm going to hide it. And we're going to hide it for now. I'm going to select the cylinder. I'm going to add a state machine to the cylinder. And I had already started a behavior, but didn't do anything with it. So I'm just going to add that behavior to here. And we're now pretty much as if I just press plus to start to add a new behavior. All right, so I'm going to now add the behavior. I'm going to do click. I'm going to name that state click, and then I'm going to add an action, also titled, that was a little fast, sorry, click/tap on entity. If you just search for click, it'll be the top choice. Actually did that twice, don't need two of them. And we're going to use an emit state. So I'm just naming this state emit. Now I'm going to search for the emit message action. And I'm going to call this one car on. Actually, let's just do car on. Space is important. Got to remember that. So I'm going to copy. I don't need to do that. And then I'm going to add another action. If you notice, let me stop. There's no transition label here, so I can't transition from this state to anything else. So if that's the case, I just need to add a transition action. There we go. And then I do need another click state in action. So I can just duplicate this one. And then I want another emit message. But I don't need to start from scratch, so I'm just going to duplicate this one. So I have two emit messages, but I do need to change this message, the second one, from car to car off. Ask Cloud9. You are correct. Let me move myself. And there we go. Okay. Thank you. All right. Here we go. So now I just need to transition. So what is going to happen here is that when I press play and when I press play and I click on this cylinder, it's going to emit the car on message. Then it's going to transition to this click message or this click state. If I click it again, it will then emit car off. And then it'll go back to this click state. So it'll just keep going back off. So I click it once and it emits car on. I click it again and it emits car off. So it just keeps going back and forth between emitting those two states. Make sense? Probably does. Okay. Now let's go back to my muscle car. I'm going to delete these behaviors and I'm going to just add another behavior, just called behavior 2. And this one's going to start off by listening. And the message we were listening to is car on, because that's the first one. Then we're going to add another state. And I'm just going to call it show. And I'm going to look for remember that naming a state does not actually add an action to it. I just like to name the state the same as the action that I add to it. So now I need to search for the show action. So there we go. And again, I don't have a transition label, so I do need to add one. So I just search for transition. And then we want to duplicate this one again because we need another listen state. So I'll listen to that. But I need to change the message to off because now it's listening to the off message. Now I need to add another state. And now I need to find a hide action that will then re-hide that entity. Simply look for hide, and there it is. And again, I don't have a transition action, so I just need to search for a transition action. Just type transition, and it'll be there. And then I'm going to add transitions from one state to the next. All right, so this cylinder is just acting as a button. And I click on it, it shows the entity. Click on it again, and it hides it. If you notice, the car is remain hidden technically over here. And that's fine. But that's just because we wanted it to be hidden to begin with. So there we go. So all it is doing is I have a behavior on this cylinder that is emitting message, car on, car off. And then the car is then listening for those messages and then for car on, car off, and then transitioning to the respective show and hide behaviors to then show or hide the entity. Now, if you wanted this one to display, if you wanted the car to display, or this muscle car to display upon play mode, then you would reverse this. Like you'd make hide the first one, and so it depends on which ones you want to appear first and what ones you don't. But that's the general concept. Will It Rain Storm 83, did I answer your question? And, oh, I was getting some of these questions mixed up. Okay, I moved myself, address that. Ask Cloud9, is there a way, you are very welcome, Rainstorm 83. Is there any way that some of the parts end user can edit and publish scene? Suppose I want to give privilege to my end user to customize the signboards after publishing the scene. Currently, there's not a way to to edit a published scene. Sorry, I mean, you can edit it. Let's see. You can edit a published scene, but you have to be logged into the Sumerian editor to do that. So you'd have to give them permissions to your account. Again, sharing scenes is a common request. Another item that is on our roadmap of requests. So yes, that's the answer to those questions. Anything else? Love this. This is great. Thank you for answering or asking really good questions. And again, Kirby, I will. If you are on Slack, and I think I've seen you before on Slack, I can give you the assets that we covered last week. So I think that's it for now. Well, at least for those questions. So let me get back here. I'm going to delete this cylinder because I don't. So the end user cannot edit as of now, correct? Ask Cloud9, correct, yes. I'm going to delete this cylinder, don't need it. And my behaviors 1 and 2, I could delete those, but we're not going to. All right, I'm going to show my car again. And all right, so I started last week by trying to figure out how we can drive a car around a scene. And we can do that. It's really easy to do that. And requires 2 different, I already have them over here, but I'm just going to start them from scratch. I guess I can always add another cylinder if we really, really want. I didn't delete your behaviors though. That's more importantly. So I can actually add that same behavior on anything, and then we can still do it. You are welcome, Ask Cloud9. Okay, let's see. Let's select the muscle car. And I'm going to delete that behavior. And let's add a new behavior. I'm just going to call it forward. I know you are. I understand. Don't worry. But I don't like deleting things because if somebody has a question or we want to repeat it, that's why deleting behaviors is not my favorite. Okay. So how do we drive this car around? So we named this behavior forward. We're going to start by we don't want it to move, obviously, if we are not pressing any keys, and that's what we're trying to do is move this car by pressing keys. So I'm going to call this one no movement. I want to control this by pressing the control keys on my keyboard. So let's add an action. And if I search for key pressed. We're going to start with forward. So I'm going to use my up arrow. So in the text box here, I'm just going to hit the up arrow. And it says up arrow. Perfect. And then while we're here, I'm also going to add another action for back arrow. All right, so now I don't have to do anything else with this state. I'm going to add another state. And we're going to call this one forward. And then we're going to add an action. And we're going to look for the move action. Because I just know that the way this is oriented, you see how the truck, the muscle car, is lined up with the blue arrow. That is the Z axis. And this way is positive Z axis. So to the left of the screen is positive Z, and to the right is negative Z. So because he's facing in the negative Z direction, I want to add a negative value to the Z value box, and I'll just put -10. Next, I want to add another action, and we're going to look for the key. I just remembered I did this wrong, actually. Key up action. And because the key up action is, the up arrow key is the one we're using for forward, we're going to match that here in this state as well. I realized that I did this wrong. I don't want key pressed. So for the no movement state, I want key down, not key pressed. And I'm going to do 2 of those. There we go. So we want an arrow up and an down arrow. Okay, ask Cloud9. I want to give some of the AWS library assets as thumbnails to my end user. So on click of that thumbnail, the object should add into a specific position. How can we achieve this? Can you define, ask Cloud9, can you define thumbnail, what you mean by thumbnail? If that makes sense. So when I think of, I don't know if you're talking about, for example, if I go to my top level entity, like this thumbnail for the actual Sumerian, or are you just talking about like an image within the scene? I'm going to go back to my forward. I'm going to keep working, but let me know. All right. Now, we want to do something very similar for backward, but we don't need to start from scratch. We can just duplicate the forward and then rename it backward. And then instead, all we got to do is instead of negative, we just got to remove that. And also change the down arrow. Now we just need to wire this up with transitions. So the key arrow, the up arrow goes to forward and the down arrow goes to backward and then back to it. All right, I also need to make sure of one thing. I do not have a rigid body added to it right now. That's an important part of this. No rigid body. Okay, so you're talking about Ask Cloud9 is asking, I'm talking about an asset as a thumbnail. So you just want an image, essentially. You want to be able to click on an image and something else, and something happen from that, correct? So on click of that thumbnail, the object should move into a specific position, I'm guessing. So for example, let's go to my So you're asking, so correct me if I'm wrong here. So you want it, so if I click on this image right here, this billboard, this image or thumbnail, that something else moves into a specific position. Is that what you're saying? I'm waiting for a response. Well, always wait. I'm waiting for the answer. Let's just go ahead and play our scene and see how this works with the forward and backward of our car. There we go. So I'm clicking forward and it drives forward. Click back and it goes backward. Forward, back, forward. So I'm holding it down and then I release and it stops just like you would want it to. There we go. Does that make sense? So the forward right there. Okay, going back to the chat room. Not from editor, actually. My end user will click. Right. So a published scene is meaning, so I click on this image here and something will move. So when I say I'm acting like the end user. When we click on this image here, this taxi will move to the other side of the street. Is that essentially what you're asking? Click on this image and this taxi moves somewhere. Would that be an example of what you're talking about? In a published scene. Yes, okay. Great, let me show you how to do that. I'm going to press stop. So right now, those images don't appear on it right now. That's because, again, that's a script displaying some images that are stored in S3. So they don't appear when we're not in play mode, but either way, I can still click on this. Okay, so let's think how to do this. If you remember, will Rainstorm 83, your behaviors that we just did, I'm going to actually add one of those behaviors at least towards one of these entities. But that image should be outside of the scene. Is it possible? Oh, the image should be outside of the scene. Is it possible? So you're saying where's that image? Okay, that's a totally different question. But that image should be outside of the scene. Where is that image living? Is it like on a web application? Is that what you're asking? Ask Cloud9. So I'm on a web app or a mobile app, for example, as you're asking, and I click on a button or I click on an image, and that taxi will move somewhere within the scene. If it is, I'm anticipating that your answer is yes. I don't know what you mean by maybe down the scene. So is it in Sumerian editor? Like, is it somewhere in this big scene? Just somewhere way far away? Or in a different scene? You said yes, but I'm not sure to which question. Within the same scene or a different scene? Or somewhere completely outside of Sumerian or completely unrelated to Sumerian? Having a good chat here in the chat room. Just clarifying some questions. If you could just clarify inside Sumerian or outside of Sumerian. in the same scene as sidebar within the same scene. I don't know exactly what you mean by sidebar. But yes. So like a static image that just sits on the side, or a sidebar with a bunch of different images. Is that what you're asking? Okay, I'm gonna maybe give me a good kind of full-on description of what you're trying to do, and I will then try to give you the best answer possible. I'm going to finish this here, but type out kind of again, like you did with Wheel Rainstorm 83, if you could describe kind of like what you're trying to do as a whole, then that's a lot easier way to work. Okay, going back to my muscle car. All right, so we figured out how to drive it forward and backward. And so let me just do this. Let me finish this, and then I will get to your other question, Ask Cloud9. All right, so we figured out how to drive this back and forward and backward. But how do we drive it? How do we turn it now? Well, let's add another behavior, and we're going to call this turn. Not trun, turn. All right. Similarly, we're just going to go no movement is our first action, our first state. And then we're going to go key down. And then we're going to add another key down. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Key down, there it is. So we have two key downs. So we're turning this time. So we're going to use the left and right arrows. So I'm going to use my left arrow for the first one and then my right arrow for the second one. Then we're going to add a state. And then we're going to say, we'll just call it left. And then we'll say add action. And we're just going to look for a rotate action. And we want to rotate it this way. So that is going around. Ooh, I'm not on the screen. There we go. This way, that would be going around the y-axis. So we'll just say, boy, I'm trying to think if it's positive or negative. 45 degrees. And then add action, key up. And we're going to do the left arrow. We're going to duplicate this state. And then we're going to make it negative 45 degrees, though. We duplicated the left state, and then we change it to right, and then we're making the value negative instead of positive, and then we're changing the key up from left arrow to right arrow. And then the left arrow, the key down arrow transition goes over there, and then we bring this one over here. The right arrow goes to the right state and back. So let's play, see what happens. So we can go forward and backward. Now we can drive a car around a scene. There we go. That's how you do it. Boom. Really not that complicated. Two states, one for forward and backward, one for left and right, or turning. Now, the issue is, check it out. We can drive through buildings, and we can go through trees, so we can go through other objects. So ideally, we'd like to be able to add colliders or rigid bodies and colliders so that they can actually run into each other, and so it would stop when it hits the building. There is some current limitations to that. So what you could do is you could add, instead of rotate or move actions, you could use the set rigid body velocity or angular velocity. But you would need to add a rigid body onto the car and also add a collider, around these buildings or around anything that you want it to be able to collide with would have to have a collider on it as well, so that those things can move. And so then instead of the rotate and move, like I just said, you would have to use the set rigid body velocity actions instead of rotate and move. If we have time to get to this, I will do it, but I want to cover some of these questions over here. Okay, so Ask Cloud9 is essentially asking, how do we do something to where we have a... I'm just thinking through this for a second. You have a scene where there's always a panel or a sidebar over here on the right or left, or top or bottom, doesn't really matter. And that if there's objects here, that if you click on them, or images, if you click on them, you will move objects within the scene. If that is correct, I'm going to continue on with how to do that. I'm going to go create entity. And let's just do... Let's do a fixed cam. I'm trying to find my fixed cam. Oh, I'm in play mode, so I need to stop. Okay, so Ask Cloud9, I want to show static images and sidebars, thumbnails inside same scene. On click a specific image, that specific object should fit into the scene, and this click actions will be performed by end user example. Got it. Okay. Yes, that is possible. Let's figure out how to do that. All right. I'm just using, you don't have to use a fixed cam, but I'm going to use one. And I'm just placing this fixed camera somewhere within my scene. There's probably good. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes. I think I can do most of this. You know what? I'm just going to do this, and this will probably cover the rest of the day. Now, because I have my fixed cam selected, you see the preview down here. You see what it is seeing. So that's where it's at. Its location in the scene is kind of irrelevant to this. So let's try create entity, and I'm just going to add a quad. And I'm going to move this quad right in front of the camera, right in front of my fixed cam. All right, so this is going to be our sidebar. This is going to be some trial and error in terms of what we see, but that's okay. What am I doing? All right, so let's see. Fixed cam. Well, that's not, all right, so you see that quad? That's not really what I want it to be. So let's grab quad 2. Because you mentioned thumbnail, Ask Cloud9, I'm just going to call it thumbnail. Now let's look again. We're just positioning this to be within or in front of our camera. All right, so we go back to thumbnail. It's not quite there. Sometimes lining things up in 3D space takes some trial and error. All right, that's probably not quite right. Yep, my quad is now out. Okay, fixed cam. All right, so it's right in the middle. Now I'm going to change the size of the quad. Nope, didn't want to do that. Let's just go. Let's make it kind of like a sidebar. Okay, we're getting there. Move it forward. We moved it too far forward. And I'll move it down just a bit. Okay. Is the same thing possible in AR app as well? Yes. Yes. All right. Now, I'm not going to do this with a bunch of different images, but essentially you would, well, let me just finish and then we can explain. All right. Now I just need an image to add to, let me just find an image somewhere on my computer. I'm sure I have something. All right, so I'm going to select this thumbnail and material. I'm going to add this rug. Oh, that's weird. I think something's chapped. I need to import this. I don't know why I can't. Apparently, maybe I don't have the right extension on this. I don't know why I can't add that. All right, I'm going to take another image. Maybe that'll work. I don't know why this is not taking it at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to skip over that because that doesn't really matter so much. Ooh, actually, I have an idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so this car moves, that taxi moves in front. So I just want to find a texture for taxi. I'm having some issues with copy and paste. I'm working on the other desktop here. Okay. Maybe I just need to refresh my scene. Oh, great. Kirby, thank you a lot. Appreciate it. Might just be running into an issue here of getting textures to work. This is not the most, this is kind of, won't really affect the function of this, but I just want it to work right. Okay, so thumbnail, let's try adding this. Okay. Textures are acting funky right now. Okay, so let's just pretend that this is, just make it red. Green. Green is kind of for go, right? And then my fixed cam, I want it to, I want this thumbnail to be underneath the fixed cam. So I'm nesting it underneath the fixed cam. I'm actually rethinking this. I could have done another cam. So you don't have to do a fixed cam. You could do just a regular one. So that if it's nested under here, wherever you move that camera, that sidebar, let me play my scene. That sidebar would always be there because it's nested under the camera. Again, I probably shouldn't have done fixed cam because that kind of goes against what I'm trying to illustrate. Well, it doesn't go against it, but it doesn't illustrate it as well. I'm going to select my fixed camera as main camera. I forgot to do that. So there we go. So pretend that's an asset bar. You'd want to line it up so it's like perfectly fit in view. But again, all right. And Taylor tested textures now. So is it in here? It is in there. Interesting. Okay, you're right. So let's do thumbnail. Just going to search for taxi. Huh, you're right. Thank you, Taylor. All right, so this texture is actually the texture that's applied to that taxi. That's what it doesn't, it looks kind of weird, but I'm just trying to give a representation of it. I'm taking way too long to get to the point of this. Now we can actually start doing stuff. Now that things are roughly in place, we can start doing some other things. Just froze up on me, so I'm going to refresh. Okay, now, again, I want that taxi to come front and center. So what do? I need to find that taxi, first of all, to figure out, or there's no way to do this. I'm just going to test this by going, I'm just adding an entity. I'm just figuring, I just want to know the coordinates of a certain location in my scene. I just want to put the taxi right there. Okay, so I'm going to select that box and 113.0.833. Great. I'm going to hide the box. Don't need it. I just wanted to figure out translation values. Now I need to add a behavior onto the taxi. So let's look for taxi. Is it that one? There it is. So that's the taxi we want to add a behavior to. And state machine. Drop behavior. Let's see. This behavior is going to be, again, actually, no, I'm just going to add the behavior 2. Similar to the behaviors I was doing before. I'm just going to alter them a little bit. So let me just get this all set up, and then we will go from there. Where's my thumbnail? Add a state machine to my thumbnail / my sidebar. And then behavior 2 we will add to that. Okay. Now I'm set up. Again, when I'm thinking off the fly, sometimes I don't think as logically as I want to. All right, so right now, so I added the same behavior, the click behavior, to this thumbnail or this image. So when I click, it's going to emit this message. What message do we want to emit? I'm going to use taxi move. I could have used the same messages, but so two messages are being emitted when I click on that: taxi move and taxi move back. All right. Now let's look at the behavior 2 that is applied to the taxi. It's listening to taxi move. And then instead of show, we're going to tween move. Now I think the location I wanted to go was 113.833. Get rid of that transition. 113.833. We'll turn off relative. Taxi move back is the next message. And then instead of show, we're going to call move. And then instead of hide, we're going to call it move back. Again, if I'm going a little fast, I apologize. Just wanted to get through this. And we do need to figure out where the taxi currently is, because we want it to go back to its current behavior. Just the way I have everything nested, it's hard to find everything within my scene. All right. This one I want I'm just copying these values down. Just copying and pasting. Okay, then so I'm just recording these values because I want it to go back to that when I click on it again. So the values are actually that's probably not going to quite move the way I want, but now that I'm thinking about it, that's probably not quite right, but we'll see. Okay, let's see how this works. So essentially what's happening is I click on, because I added a behavior to this thumbnail is what I'm calling it. It emits a message, taxi move. Then it transitions to the next click. So if I click it again, It'll then move it back, or it emits that message, taxi move back. Then behavior 2 is listening for taxi move. Once it hears it, it will move it using tween move to this location. And then it will move it back. Once it hears the second click, or the taxi move back message, it'll move it back to those locations. I'm actually really second guessing whether this is going to work the way I want it to. It doesn't quite work the way I want it to. The reason why is because those coordinates, because of the way it's nested, it's not quite right. So my first coordinates, you saw it moving correctly the first time. So what I really need is come on. Just copying these values. So it actually was working, but my values were just not quite right. Okay, so those values that I originally wanted, putting them there. Then I'm gonna move this car back to roughly where it was before. Okay, so let's play. Click on this. There we go. Moves front and center. Click on it again. Oh shoot! Now all my coordinates are all goofed up. Yeah, again, this is because I have it the coordinates when you have them nested are a little bit interesting. Huh. Just really want it to work the right way. Okay, moves there. Then it goes somewhere else. Okay. Does that make sense, what I'm doing? Ask Cloud9. Again, it's not going back to where I want it to go, and that's mainly because this is nested under something, and so the coordinates are just a little bit, are kind of goofed up. That's the reason. But you can see it moving to where you want it to go, and then it goes off because I just have the coordinates incorrect. That's why nesting nesting is in like this whole city. This is one giant entity, and then this muscle car, for example, is one entity inside of that, and then this is the rest of the entity inside of that. And under that entity, then you have all the different buildings and cars and everything. And so when you start messing with these translations, when you have like multiple layers of child entities, your translations can be a little bit confusing because it's just the way it's all layered in the hierarchy of the translations. So ask Cloud9, if you could let me know if that is kind of what you were looking for, that would be great. I hope that answers your question. And thank you, Taylor, for the heads up on the materials. That did work. I don't know why that is happening, but we got it to work the way we want it. So that's how you answered a few different questions. How you move a car, how you drive it around a scene. We didn't get to how to actually add colliders and make it so it can run into different buildings and other objects. We also looked at how you create a sidebar that where you click an image or some sort of texture, and then it will move an object to front and center in your scene. You can also click on an entity to hide and show other entities. things like that. Ask Cloud9. Let me know if that's the way what you were looking for. I hope it is. If not, please reach out to me on Slack and we can dig further into what you're trying to accomplish. Any other questions out there regarding any of the stuff we covered? Again, thanks for your patience. I love the good questions and on the spot, like how do you do this, and trying to figure out the best way to do it. Super fun. I really enjoy that. Just looking at the chat room. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I am going to sign off or send you to our resources slide. So if you need anything else, you can find me and a lot of other people in using those resources. But for now, that should do it. Taylor, thank you so much. Love that you're always here. Hope you're doing well, my man. And everybody else, thank you for joining. Kirby, I guess you're gone. Ask Cloud9, Real Rainstorm 83. Thanks for all your great questions. All right, that's the stream. That's a wrap. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.